What does California Representative Eric Swalwell of the state's 14th House District have to say about SignalGate, DOGE cuts, as well as tariffs? Well, I asked him. Here's our conversation. Democrats have been receiving a lot of concern from their constituents over a perceived lack of pushback against the Trump administration. So what do you make of those concerns, and are they valid?
People have a right to be concerned about their economic safety, their national security, their retirement security. What I'm hearing from people is simply, I don't feel safe. And then what are you going to do to make me feel safe? And I approach that as there's a lot we can do. We're actually not helpless. For starters, in the House of Representatives, the margins are very thin, meaning Republicans need to be perfect. They need every one of their members to vote for anything they're trying to pass. Otherwise, if they lose up to 2 to 3 members, we can stop any harmful legislation, or we can pass, our own priorities. And so we're not helpless on that front. On the organizing front, the American people are not helpless, and they're showing up, with, public protests, with participation in Florida in its special elections, and a big win in Wisconsin with its Supreme Court election. And so I see it as, if we show a fight inside the Congress and people show fight with their activism outside of Congress in their communities, that small victories will lead to big victories. And so we've had some small victories. It's not enough because we're still feeling the pain from this new administration, but we're not helpless at all. And I think people are starting to see that my participation as a citizen can actually make a difference.
I'm glad you mentioned what happened last night, because that's where I wanted to go next. Obviously, there was a victory for your party in Wisconsin's Supreme Court race, as well as some overperformance in a couple of Florida's congressional districts. The expectation wasn't that these Democrats were going to win, but the fact that they performed better than the presidential ticket did back in November was something that Democrats were pretty optimistic about. So in terms of that, what do these things suggest about 2026 in your eyes?
That America is not going quietly. That if Donald Trump thinks that he can remake our democracy into a dictatorship, we're not going quietly. That in places where he had won with, anywhere from 30 to 50%, those margins were cut by half or more in Florida. And in Wisconsin, where Elon Musk was willing to spend, upwards of $30 million, almost paying people off to vote, that democracy is not for sale, and that we won there. And so we're on the move. Democracy is on the move. Even as Republicans do everything they can, to tear it down, we're not going to let that happen. And so I hope people's takeaway, I hope everyone's takeaway is, I matter, my activism matters, my country matters. And if I just go one rung higher on what I've typically been willing to do to advance my democracy, that I can make a real difference. So if you've never gone to a public protest, April 5, there's a day of action across the country. Go to your first public protest. Go one rung higher from what you've ever done before, and I promise we'll get there.
Now, the president will, not too long from now, announce additional tariffs on top of the tariffs that he's announced previously, and this has been a key component of his economic strategy. What do you make of this strategy? Because one of the big reasons that voters went to the right this election was the economy. That was a big issue, top line issue. How do Democrats form a coherent message about the president's economic strategy? Because it's definitely breeded some uncertainty, and experts warn the potential for inflation.
It's a Trump tax, plain and simple. We are putting a tax on American consumers. 4 out of 5 items in every person's shopping cart at Walmart was made outside the United States. And so that means 80% of what you pay for is going to cost more. Yes, we need to manufacture more in America. That is going to take a long time before that happens. But in the meantime, we're going to see a long period of pain for Americans, as they buy, groceries, as they, buy electronics, as they buy, their household items that they need. We're going to see pain. And so I would have approached this as, let's further incentivize American manufacturing. Joe Biden did this by passing the CHIPS Act, where I think under half of the dollars there have still not been allocated, and Trump is stopping them from being allocated. That's how you create manufacturing base in America, not by putting tariffs on all these countries where we are the ones who will end up paying.
Now, there has been this uncertainty that I mentioned that was created by these tariffs, and you're definitely seeing that in the volatility of the markets lately. And if you're someone who's put away money for retirement, that obviously can be concerning, but tariffs are an executive power. So in this situation, what checks and balances exist for someone who's maybe concerned about where these policies will lead?
Here's what's insane, is my colleagues gave up Congress's ability to check Trump on tariffs when they passed his budget a couple of weeks ago. So part of the budget that was passed, the Musk-Trump budget, gave up Congress's ability where before we could vote to override tariffs. That's gone now. I don't know why we would do that, especially with this runaway tariff train that Trump is taking the country on. But Congress has lost a lot of its ability. So that means it's on public sentiment that Americans in their days of action, in their calling their representatives, calling the White House, winning in these small elections and accruing these victory after victory, achievements in these races, that will speak volumes. And so we're going to have to continue to do the work because we're going to be feeling the pain.
Now, because Democrats are in the minority, they have consistently warned of cuts to Social Security and Medicare. Now, Republicans say that won't be happening, but in the case that that does happen, do Democrats have a plan to respond?
Yeah. So in Donald Trump's upcoming reconciliation budget, where he's going to take essentially $1 trillion, he's going to add $1 trillion at least in new spending, which long-term can add trillions of dollars in new debt for America. It's expected that much of that will benefit billionaires and the wealthiest among us, people that you and I will never meet, will never know. Our communities will not see benefits. Billionaires will see benefits. And so what Democrats have to do is not give a single vote to that. I don't think a Democrat will do that, but also to tell the stories of who are the winners and who are the losers in this bill. The losers are seniors who depend on Social Security, Medicare, senior services. It's the poorest families in America who depend on Medicaid. 32% of Americans receive their health care through Medicaid. Over 40% of all births in America are paid for by Medicaid. And so we have to really elevate the winners and losers so that is clear and we set the stakes.
Now, there have certainly been cuts to the federal workforce as part of the Trump administration's cost-cutting efforts, and some of those cuts have been at the Social Security Administration, and there have been complaints about delays that have happened as a result of that. And so, would you say there's a willingness on the other side of the aisle, at least among some of your colleagues, to address these concerns and these issues that are starting to come up as a result of those cuts?
Public sentiment is working. We're seeing that as Americans are waving their hands and declaring, don't make it harder for me to get access to my benefits because Social Security offices are understaffed because people have been fired. I'm starting to see more and more of my colleagues publicly say that DOGE should slow down or be more careful with its cuts. That's not what they were saying a month, 2 months ago. So the public sentiment is working. It's just a matter of, will Donald Trump finally take Elon Musk and his DOGE team out of the White House and make sure that people's services, are delivered, or will he continue this pain? And again, we will have to wait for the midterms. I think public sentiment can be more powerful than anything, as long as we keep our foot on the gas.
One part of the federal government that was hit heavy by these cuts has been the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, USAID. And one of the things that we're currently facing as a country is the rapid geopolitical growth of countries like Russia, China, North Korea. Would you say now is the time to cede soft power as we're facing growing geopolitical power of our adversaries?
Cutting or eliminating USAID is exactly what Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran want us to do. So if you want to follow their playbook on how do you reduce America's influence in the world, that would be one way. It also reduces us domestically with our own economy. And let me tell you why. I was in the St. Louis suburbs a couple weeks ago, and I had an event there where one of the individuals who attended told me that he was a healthcare small business owner and that he had a $20 million contract with USAID where he delivered his services on his side at the end of 2024. He sent the invoice to USAID to be paid the $20 million that he was owed and was told that they're not going to pay. That's not right. And he had to lay off about half of his workforce because they are unwilling to pay. That's wrong. It doesn't just reduce who receives help overseas. It hurts a St. Louis area small business owner and the people who work for him. So these cuts have not been efficient. They've just been cruel, and they've caused chaos. And they're going to set us back in the world, and they're going to make it harder for us to pick ourselves up economically here at home.
USAID, obviously an example of soft power, but you also have hard power, which is the Defense Department. And one place where there has been this bipartisan agreement over the years has been on cutting some defense spending. It's obviously where we put most of our money toward in the budget. On top of that, it's our largest department. And so there's been those warnings in the past, even from President Eisenhower, that the Defense Department shouldn't get too big. Do you think that there is a willingness to collaborate on defense spending? Because for past few years, it's actually failed some audits.
It actually really hasn't been subjected to a sweeping audit as it should. So, I'm okay with, looking at the Department of Defense and finding inefficiencies. It's one of the largest, drivers of our deficit and debt. Of course, I want to make sure that, we honor our commitments to our troops, that we can defend the country, from the risks that we face and the threats that come at us from Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and then non-state terrorist organizations. But I have to believe that through technology and efficiencies, we can find ways, to reduce our overall defense spend. But here's one efficiency that they have eliminated. Being a part of NATO or having treaties with allied nations as to mutual defense, that reduces what we spend overall on our own military. And by walking away from our commitment in Ukraine, by essentially saying we're not going to honor our commitment to NATO, by putting these tariffs on Canada and insulting them and telling them that they should be the 51st state, we are losing allies in the world. And when you don't have any friends in the world, you have to spend more in your own defense because you can't count on them to come and have your back. That doesn't add up either. Doesn't make much sense, doesn't make us safer.
The last thing I want to get your comment on is SignalGate, as it's being called, because this is something that has kind of gotten that bipartisan, to some extent, criticism, which was the fact that National Security Advisor Mike Waltz inadvertently added a reporter to a Signal group chat of high-ranking officials. What do you think should be the outcome here? Because obviously there are calls for an investigation. Do you think that investigation should happen first and then consequences if the investigation says so? Or consequences now before the investigation?
Every person a part of SignalGate has admitted their role. They're just trying to tell you that it doesn't matter. So I don't think we need much of an investigation. Mike Waltz admitted that he created the group. Pete Hegseth admitted that he put the information into the chat. And so to me, that means they should all resign. They should not have access to classified information. And as we speak, right before I sat down with you, I was reading that there are at least 20 other Signal chats similar to SignalGate that have been set up. And so these leaders, there's probably better words for them, these leaders have exposed our troops and operational security in every way. This is why you cannot put unqualified people into these trusted, serious positions, because they can't protect us. And it's only going to get worse. And they've compounded this mistake by lying to the American people. So they can't keep us safe and they can't be trusted. And that's a big problem. And our enemies in the world are looking at us and sharpening their knives and wondering Are we as untouchable as the world once thought we were?
Representative Eric Swalwell of California's 14th House District, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Jaden.
Thank you, I appreciate it.